Bavarian winds of 1827 carried a biting chill, a fitting welcome to the imposing silhouette of the Blackwood Boarding School. Its stone facade, weathered by centuries, seemed to absorb the meager light of the late autumn afternoon. Elias, a boy of 10 with a mop of unruly brown hair and eyes that darted with a nervous energy, clutched his small, worn satchel. He stood beside his mother, her hand a cold, trembling anchor on his shoulder. The air thrummed with an unspoken apprehension, a feeling that settled deep in Elias's stomach. "It's for your own good, Elias," his mother murmured, her voice thin against the wind's mournful sigh. Her gaze, usually so warm, was clouded with a mix of fear and resignation. "They say the discipline here, it's unparalleled." Discipline. Elias had heard that word repeated like a mantra since the letter arrived, adorned with the Blackwood crest. A boarding school for troubled children, a place to mold young minds into diligent, obedient adults. But the whispers in the village told a different story. A place shrouded in secrets, where children went in and sometimes, it seemed, never truly came out the same. He shivered, and it wasn't just the cold. They were ushered inside by a gaunt, somber woman with hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to strain her features. Her name, she stated flatly, was Frau Weber, the school's matron. Her eyes, pale and unsettling, seemed to bore through Elias, assessing, dissecting. The interior of Blackwood was a labyrinth of dim corridors and echoing chambers. The air inside was heavy, smelling of old wood, dust, and something else Elias couldn't quite place. A faint metallic scent, like rain on rusted iron. As they walked, Elias noticed other new arrivals, a handful of children, all looking equally lost and bewildered. There was Greta, a quiet girl with long, braided hair who hugged a wooden doll tightly. Thomas, a scrawny boy who kept glancing over his shoulder, and young Lena, no older than 7, tears silently streaming down her face. Their parents, like Elias's mother, wore expressions of strained hope mingled with a palpable unease. They were led to a large hall where a stern-faced man, Herr Schmidt, the headmaster, addressed the new students and their parents. His voice, deep and resonant, filled the room, emphasizing the school's strict regimen, its commitment to moral rectitude, and the importance of obedience. He spoke of children being refined, of shedding the weaknesses of youth. Elias felt a knot tighten in his stomach. It all sounded so grand, so noble, yet an unsettling undercurrent permeated every word. He noticed Herr Schmidt's eyes, though piercing, seemed to lack a certain light, a warmth. They were flat, almost devoid of emotion. After the formal address, parents were swiftly dismissed. Elias watched his mother's retreating back, a profound sense of abandonment washing over him. She paused at the heavy oak doors, looking back at him, her lips forming an unvoiced goodbye. Then, she was gone, swallowed by the gloom. Frau Weber then herded the new students towards their dormitories. The boys' dormitory was a large, sparsely furnished room with rows of narrow beds. The windows, high and grimy, offered only a distorted view of the darkening sky. Elias chose a bed near the far wall, hoping for some semblance of privacy. He watched as the other boys, equally apprehensive, settled in. Later that evening, after a meager dinner of watery broth and stale bread, Elias lay in his bed, listening to the creaks and groans of the old building. The wind howled outside, a mournful lament that echoed the emptiness he felt inside. He heard soft sobs from a bed across the room, young Lena no doubt missing her family. The atmosphere was oppressive, a silent weight that pressed down on them all. Suddenly, a strange, faint light flickered from the end of the corridor, visible through the cracked door of their dormitory. It was an unnatural glow, almost ethereal, unlike any lamp or candle. It pulsed, softly for a moment, then vanished. Elias sat bolt upright, his heart thumping. He strained his ears, but there was only the wind and the distant muffled cries of Lena. Was it just a trick of the light, or something more? He lay back down, pulling the scratchy blanket up to his chin, a new layer of unease settling over him. The night was young, and Blackwood felt like a place where shadows held secrets and the darkness itself had eyes. If you're enjoying the story and want to find out what happens next at Blackwood, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the upcoming chapters. Remember, this is a fictional story. The first week at Blackwood settled into a monotonous, chilling routine. Days were spent in austere classrooms, learning by rote from stern teachers whose voices were as dry as the crumbling plaster on the walls. Meals were silent affairs in the cold, cavernous dining hall, supervised by Frau Weber, whose watchful eyes seemed to miss nothing. The food, always bland and meager, did little to quell the gnawing emptiness in the children's stomachs, a hunger that seemed to extend beyond mere sustenance. Elias quickly learned the unspoken rules: speak only when spoken to, never question authority, and blend into the shadows. He observed his fellow students. Greta, in the girls' dormitory, remained withdrawn, her doll her only confidant. Thomas, despite his initial skittishness, tried to project an air of bravado, but Elias caught glimpses of fear in his eyes. Lena still cried herself to sleep most nights, her tiny sobs a heartbreaking underscore to the pervasive silence. The most unnerving aspect of Blackwood, however, was the atmosphere itself. A constant low hum seemed to permeate the air, a vibration that Elias sometimes felt in his teeth. It wasn't a sound exactly, but a presence, a heavy shroud that stifled joy and amplified every anxious thought. The school was old, true, but this wasn't just the settling of ancient timbers. It felt deliberate. One afternoon, during a mandatory outdoor recreation period, a euphemism for shivering in the cold courtyard, Elias managed to strike up a hesitant conversation with Thomas. Thomas, it turned out, had arrived a week before Elias. "Have you noticed anything strange?" Elias whispered, kicking at a loose pebble. Thomas's head snapped up, his eyes darting around. "Like what?" "The light," Elias said, lowering his voice further. "The other night, a strange glow from the corridor." Thomas's face paled. "I saw it too. I thought I was dreaming. It was a blue light almost, like a phantom firefly." "And the hum?" Elias pressed, encouraged by the shared experience. "Do you feel it? Like the air is alive, but not in a good way?" Thomas nodded vigorously. "It gets worse at night. Sometimes I hear whispers too, like voices just outside the dormitory, but when I listen hard, they vanish." He hugged himself, despite the thick wool coat. "My parents said this place would fix me, make me stronger, but I just feel weaker." Their conversation was cut short by the sharp crack of a cane against stone as one of the prefects, an older, equally humorless boy, approached. They quickly fell silent, pretending to study the bare trees. That night, Elias found himself unable to sleep. The hum was particularly strong, vibrating through his mattress. He listened intently, and then he heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible whisper, just as Thomas had described. It sounded like a child's voice, muffled, distressed, coming from beyond the dormitory door. He crept out of bed, his bare feet freezing on the stone floor. He tiptoed to the door, pressing his ear against the cold wood. The whisper grew clearer. Fragmented words carried on the oppressive silence. He could make out something like, "Can't see, dark." And then a small, choked sob. It was Lena's voice, but she was in the girls' dormitory, on the opposite side of the school. How could he hear her so clearly? He pulled the door open a crack, just wide enough to peer into the dimly lit corridor. The faint, ethereal blue light that he and Thomas had seen before was there again, emanating from further down the hall, near the staircase that led to the lower levels of the school. It pulsed, brighter this time, casting eerie shadows that danced on the walls. The air grew colder, and Elias felt a prickling sensation on his skin, like tiny needles. Suddenly, a shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness near the light. It was tall and thin, moving with a disturbing grace, almost gliding. It approached the blue glow, and Elias saw it was Frau Weber, her silhouette distorted by the unnatural light. She seemed to be examining something on the floor, something small and indistinct. A gasp caught in Elias's throat, and he quickly pulled the door shut, heart pounding. He stumbled back to his bed, scrambling under the covers, trembling. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to make sense of what he'd seen. Lena's voice, a strange blue light, and Frau Weber lurking in the shadows. What was happening in Blackwood? What secrets did the ancient walls hold? The questions swirled in his mind, robbing him of sleep, replacing it with a chilling sense of dread. The mystery was only just beginning to unfold, weaving its tendrils around them all. The following days intensified Elias's unease. He attempted to speak with Thomas about what he'd witnessed, but Thomas, now even more withdrawn, shied away from the conversation, whispering that it was dangerous to talk. The shared fear had ironically driven a wedge between them. Elias felt isolated, surrounded by the watchful eyes of the staff and the palpable anxiety of the other children. He began to observe everything, every subtle shift in the school's routine, every flicker of emotion on the faces of the staff. Herr Schmidt remained impassive, a stony figure of authority. Frau Weber, however, seemed to carry an almost unsettling stillness, her movements precise, her gaze ever present. Elias noticed a new detail about her, a faint, almost imperceptible discoloration on her fingertips, a faint brownish-red hue. He dismissed it as dirt or an old stain, but it lingered in his mind. The blue light, though Elias didn't see it again himself, became a whispered topic among some of the older boys in the dormitory. They spoke of night walks and sleepwalkers, but their hushed tones hinted at something far more sinister than simple somnambulism. Elias overheard fragments of conversations, the children who don't wake up right, the blank stares, the whispers in the dark. The rumors were vague, unsettling, and seemed to connect back to the strange events of the night. One afternoon, during a history lesson in a drafty classroom, Elias noticed something peculiar about Herr Schmidt. As the headmaster turned to write on the blackboard, a fleeting glint caught Elias's eye. A small, metallic object tucked into Herr Schmidt's belt. It was gone almost instantly, hidden by his coat, but it looked like a small, intricate key, unlike any ordinary key Elias had ever seen. Its design was complex, almost ceremonial. A few days later, Elias was tasked with delivering a stack of old textbooks to the school's library, a rarely used room on the 3rd floor. The library was a forgotten place, thick with dust and the scent of decaying paper. Cobwebs draped from the high ceilings, and the tall shelves groaned under the weight of forgotten tomes. As Elias placed the books on a shelf, his gaze fell upon a section marked Local History and Lore. He hesitated, a fleeting thought of Frau Weber's ever-present eyes crossing his mind, but curiosity won out. He pulled a heavy, leather-bound book from the shelf. Its title, embossed in faded gold, read, The Annals of Blackwood Parish, 17th to 19th Century. He opened it carefully, the brittle pages rustling. The book detailed the history of the surrounding area, local families, and significant events. As he flipped through, a particular passage caught his eye, describing the construction of the Blackwood Boarding School itself. The text spoke of the school's founder, a reclusive nobleman named Baron von Kessel, and his unusual fascination with ancient Bavarian alchemy and a peculiar branch of natural philosophy focused on the stimulation of dormant human faculties. Elias frowned. Dormant faculties? The phrasing was odd, almost sinister. The book described the school's design as being uniquely suited to its purpose, with a mention of subterranean chambers and specialized ventilation systems designed for specific, unspecified experiments. Elias's heart began to beat faster. Experiments? What kind of experiments? He skimmed further, finding a chilling entry from a few decades prior. Reports of a peculiar ailment affecting some students, described as a deep somnolence, followed by a gradual fading of sensory perception. Sensory perception. Could it mean sight? His mind flashed to the rumors of the blank stares. Suddenly, the heavy wooden door to the library creaked open. Elias jumped, slamming the book shut and shoving it back onto the shelf. Frau Weber stood in the doorway, her pale eyes fixed on him. Her expression was unreadable, but a chill ran down Elias's spine. "Finished with your task, boy?" Her voice was a low, flat whisper. "Yes, Frau Weber," Elias stammered, trying to appear nonchalant. She took a slow step into the room, her gaze sweeping over the shelves, lingering for a moment on the section Elias had just been perusing. "This room is not for idle curiosity, Elias. Curiosity can be a dangerous thing." Her words hung in the dusty air, a subtle threat. Elias quickly mumbled his apologies and hurried out of the library, the image of the strange key and the unsettling passage about sensory perception burning in his mind. The school's secrets were deeper than he imagined, twisting into something far more sinister than mere discipline. He knew now that the whispers were not just rumors. They were echoes of a dark truth waiting to be uncovered. And he, perhaps foolishly, had just taken his first step down an unseen path. The encounter in the library left Elias shaken, but more determined. Frau Weber's warning, rather than deterring him, only confirmed his suspicions. There was something significant hidden within the school's past, something they desperately wanted to keep buried. He resolved to be more careful, more discreet, but he would not stop searching for answers. He began to subtly probe his peers for more information, particularly the older boys who had mentioned the night walks. Maximilian, a quiet, watchful boy a few years older than Elias, was the most receptive. Maximilian had been at Blackwood for 3 years, long enough to have seen many students come and go, and his eyes held a weariness beyond his years. One evening, after the younger boys were asleep, Elias crept over to Maximilian's bed. "Maximilian," he whispered, "do you know anything about the night walks?" Maximilian stiffened, then slowly turned to face Elias. His voice was barely audible. "They take some of us, Elias, the ones who are most restless. They say it's to calm us, to help us sleep." "And where do they take you?" Maximilian hesitated. "Down to the lower levels. There are rooms down there, cold rooms, and lights, different lights." His voice trembled. "I don't remember much after they take us. It's like a dream, but a bad one. And when you wake up, your eyes feel strange, heavy. Have you seen anyone change?" Elias pressed, his voice barely a whisper. "Anyone with a blank stare?" Maximilian closed his eyes, a shiver running through him. "Hans. He left last month. He was always quiet, but in the end he didn't speak at all, just stared. And his eyes, they were like glass. And little Liesel from the girls' dormitory. She's been here for months now, locked away. They say she's unwell. But I saw her. Her eyes are just empty." The pieces began to click into place for Elias. The deep somnolence, the fading of sensory perception, the blue light, the whispers, the empty eyes. It all pointed to something happening in the lower levels of Blackwood, something that deliberately targeted the children's sight. Elias began to develop a plan. He needed to get to the lower levels, to find those cold rooms, and understand what was truly happening. The key he'd seen on Herr Schmidt's belt. It had to be for one of those doors. The school's layout was a maze, but Elias had a keen sense of direction. He began to map it out in his mind, noting the locations of the staff's quarters, the main halls, and most importantly, the various staircases. He paid close attention during their daily exercises, observing where staff members went, which doors they locked, and what patterns they followed. One particularly cold morning, as thick fog rolled in from the surrounding forests, enshrouding Blackwood in a ghostly veil, Elias saw his opportunity. During breakfast, a fire alarm, a rare event, blared through the school. It was a crude bell, but its clangorous ring sent everyone into a hurried, albeit orderly, evacuation to the courtyard. Amidst the chaos, Elias saw Herr Schmidt hastily secure his office door, the distinctive, intricate key glinting for a moment before disappearing into his coat pocket. As the students huddled in the courtyard, shivering in the damp air, Elias noticed Herr Schmidt and Frau Weber engaged in a hushed, intense conversation near the main entrance, their backs partially turned. This was his chance. He discreetly separated himself from the group, melting into the thick fog that clung to the building. He moved with surprising agility for a small boy, his heart hammering against his ribs. He knew Herr Schmidt's office was off limits, but it was the most likely place to find that key. The office was located near the headmaster's private living quarters, a section of the school usually locked down. The main hall was deserted, the echoing silence broken only by the distant clanging of the alarm bell. Elias crept towards Herr Schmidt's office. The door was indeed locked. He pressed his ear against it, hearing nothing. He tried the handle, but it was unyielding. He needed that key. He darted to the coat rack near the entrance where the staff often left their outer garments during emergencies. He remembered Herr Schmidt often wore a heavy wool overcoat. He located it, a large dark garment, and plunged his hand into the pocket. His fingers brushed against something cold and metallic. He pulled it out. It was the key, intricate and heavy in his small hand. A sudden sharp cough echoed from down the corridor. Elias froze, his blood running cold. He quickly shoved the key into his own pocket and darted behind a large tapestry depicting a hunting scene. His heart hammered. He peered out from behind the tapestry, seeing Frau Weber emerge from the shadows. She paused, her pale eyes sweeping the empty hall. She seemed to sense something amiss. Her gaze lingered on the coat rack. Elias held his breath, fearing she would notice the missing key, or worse, see him. After a tense moment, she continued down the hall, disappearing into the fog that seeped in through the open front door. Elias let out a silent breath. He had the key. Now, he just needed to find the doors it unlocked and what lay beyond them. The school's hidden depths beckoned, promising answers, but also an escalating peril. The mystery of the missing sight, the blank stares, and the strange blue light was about to lead him into the heart of Blackwood's darkest secret. If you're finding this mystery intriguing and want to uncover the truth alongside Elias, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any part of this chilling story. Remember, this is a fictional story. With the key safely tucked into his pocket, Elias felt a surge of both terror and grim determination. He knew he was playing a dangerous game, but the alternative, allowing more children to fall victim to whatever malevolent force was at play in Blackwood, was unacceptable. The fog persisted throughout the day, providing a natural veil, a sense of unreality that suited his clandestine mission. He spent the rest of the day in a state of heightened awareness, his senses acutely tuned. He noted the placement of every shadow, the creak of every floorboard, the rhythmic patrol of the prefects. He learned that the lower levels were accessible by a discreet staircase hidden behind a false wall in the old servants' quarters, a section of the school rarely frequented by students. He'd overheard a prefect grumbling about having to fetch something from the forgotten storerooms, and had seen him disappear behind a particular section of wall. That night, the hum was almost unbearable, a low thrumming that seemed to vibrate in Elias's very bones. It was a moonless night, the darkness outside as absolute as the one within Blackwood's walls. Elias waited until the dormitory was steeped in the heavy breathing of sleeping boys. The occasional distant sob from Lena's dormitory was the only sound breaking the oppressive silence. He slipped out of bed, careful not to disturb Maximilian, who lay in a fitful sleep. He moved like a phantom, barefoot on the cold stone, his small heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The corridors were inky black, save for the faint moonlight filtering through a few high windows, painting ghostly patterns on the ancient walls. Each creak of the floorboards sounded like a thunderclap in the oppressive quiet. He found the servants' quarters, a forgotten wing of the school reeking of damp and decay. The air grew colder here, a biting chill that seemed to seep into his bones. He located the section of wall the prefect had disappeared behind. He ran his hand along the rough stone, searching for a seam, a latch. His fingers brushed against a barely perceptible crack, then a small, cleverly disguised button. He pressed it, and with a soft click and a faint groan of old wood, a section of the wall slid inward, revealing a narrow spiral staircase spiraling down into absolute darkness. The air that rushed out was cold and stale, carrying a faint metallic scent, the same scent he'd noticed upon his arrival. Taking a deep breath, Elias descended into the unknown. The stairs were uneven and slippery with dust. He moved slowly, one cautious step after another, his hand dragging along the cold, damp stone wall. The darkness was absolute, pressing in on him, and he had to rely solely on his sense of touch. He imagined the vast, unknown depths below, the secrets they held, and the strange blue light that pulsed within them. After what felt like an eternity, his foot met a flat stone floor. He had reached the bottom. He stretched out his hands, feeling his way through the oppressive blackness. The passage was narrow, leading deeper into the school's foundations. He stumbled forward, his fingers brushing against cold, rough walls. The hum intensified here, vibrating through the very ground beneath his feet. It felt as though he had stepped into the heart of a vast, silent machine. Then he saw it. Ahead, a faint, unearthly blue glow pulsed from around a corner. It was exactly as Thomas had described, and as he had seen from his dormitory. It cast long, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe on the walls, creating grotesque, fleeting figures. He crept closer, his breath catching in his throat. The passage opened into a large subterranean chamber. The blue light emanated from a series of strange, intricate contraptions that lined the walls. They were tall, metallic structures, vaguely reminiscent of large brass telescopes, but with complex arrangements of glass tubes and wires. The tubes pulsed with the eerie blue light, and within some of them, Elias could vaguely make out the shapes of various chemical solutions, bubbling and swirling. The air was thick with the metallic scent and a faint, acrid odor. In the center of the room, there were several peculiar chairs, made of dark wood and bound with leather straps. Each chair had a complex headrest, with what looked like a series of small, precisely crafted lenses or mirrors aimed towards the occupant's eyes. And in one of these chairs, Elias saw a small, still figure. It was Lena. Her eyes were open, but they were vacant, unfocused. The blue light from the contraption next to her chair pulsed directly onto her face, reflecting eerily in her unseeing eyes. She was utterly motionless, save for the shallow rise and fall of her chest. Elias's blood ran cold. This was what they were doing. This was the source of the fading of sensory perception, the blank stares. He felt a wave of nausea, a profound horror unlike anything he had ever experienced. He heard a low murmur, and a shadow detached itself from the deeper gloom at the far end of the chamber. It was Frau Weber, standing beside another, larger contraption, her back to Elias. She was adjusting something, and the blue light intensified for a moment, then stabilized. Elias realized he was looking at the truth of Blackwood, not a school but a laboratory, a place of chilling experiments where innocent children were being subjected to something unspeakable. He had found his answers, but now he needed to find a way to expose this horror, to save Lena and the others. The mystery had deepened, revealing a dark heart beating beneath the venerable stones of Blackwood. He knew he couldn't turn back. Not now. Elias remained frozen in the shadows, his mind reeling from the horrific discovery. Lena, strapped into that grotesque chair, her eyes vacant and unseeing, was a sight that would forever be etched into his memory. The chilling realization of what Blackwood truly was, a place of sinister experimentation, filled him with a cold dread that surpassed any fear he had known. He watched Frau Weber, her movements precise and methodical as she adjusted the strange apparatus. She hummed a low, tuneless melody, a sound that, in this context, was utterly chilling. He noticed a faint, almost sickly sweet aroma now mingling with the metallic scent, something he couldn't identify, but which seemed to contribute to the pervasive oppressiveness of the air. Suddenly a voice boomed from the entrance to the chamber, startling Elias so profoundly he almost cried out. "Frau Weber, is Subject 12 showing adequate progression?" It was Herr Schmidt, his figure silhouetted against the faint light from the passage above. He carried a flickering oil lamp, casting grotesque dancing shadows that made the machinery seem to writhe. "Subject 12, headmaster," Frau Weber replied, her voice devoid of emotion. "Is responding as expected. The optic nerves are showing complete desensitization. The process will be finalized by dawn." "Excellent," Herr Schmidt grunted, his gaze falling upon Lena. "Another success for Baron von Kessel's legacy. The world will see the true potential of the Enlightened Sight program." Elias's mind raced. Enlightened sight. This wasn't about blindness. It was about something else entirely, something they were inflicting on the children. He felt a wave of righteous anger mixing with his fear. He had to stop them. But how? He needed more evidence, something undeniable. His gaze darted around the chamber. On a small wooden table near Frau Weber, he saw a stack of ledgers and what looked like a blueprint. This was his chance. He waited for the opportune moment. Herr Schmidt moved closer to Lena, examining her with a detached clinical interest. Frau Weber turned to consult one of the complex dials on the machinery. Elias seized the opportunity. He moved silently, a small dark shadow darting across the stone floor. He reached the table, his fingers trembling as he snatched one of the ledgers and rolled up the blueprint, tucking them both inside his shirt. He was about to retreat when his foot brushed against something on the floor. It was a small, ornate vial, half full of a viscous pale blue liquid, the same color as the pulsing light. Instinctively, he pocketed it. He heard Herr Schmidt clear his throat, and Elias scrambled back into the shadows, his heart threatening to burst from his chest. He was sure they had heard him, but they were engrossed in their morbid examination of Lena, oblivious to his brief, desperate raid. He retreated slowly, carefully, back into the narrow passage. He could hear their voices, muffled but distinct, discussing neurological pathways and sensory deprivation. The words were terrifying in their cold, scientific detachment. He climbed the spiral staircase, his legs aching, his breath ragged. The air above felt lighter, despite the lingering fog. He slipped back through the false wall, closing it silently behind him. He then made his way back to the dormitory, his stolen evidence pressed tightly against his chest. Back in his bed, he pulled the blanket over his head, shielding himself from the oppressive gloom of the room. He carefully pulled out the ledger. It was filled with precise clinical handwriting, detailing the progress of each subject. He saw names he recognized, Hans, Liesel, and then, horrifically, Lena, listed as Subject 12. The entries described the application of luminous energy and the gradual disintegration of visual faculties, followed by a recalibration of internal perception. Recalibration. What did that mean? He unrolled the blueprint. It was a detailed schematic of the Blackwood Boarding School, but with additional disturbing annotations. There were lines connecting the subterranean chamber to the school's water supply, and symbols Elias didn't understand, resembling arcane alchemical sigils. More disturbingly, there were diagrams of the human eye, with specific points highlighted, and notes about optic nerve manipulation and sensory rerouting. The vial he had taken contained the same blue liquid that powered the machines. He held it up to the faint light from the window. It seemed to glow faintly, even in the absence of the machines. Elias had stumbled into a nightmare far deeper than he could have ever imagined. It wasn't just about blinding children. It was about twisting their minds, reshaping their perception. The enlightened sight was a horrifying mockery, a form of forced, unnatural perception. He had to expose them, to warn the world of Blackwood's true purpose. The mystery wasn't just about what was happening, but why, and to what horrific end. He clutched the evidence, knowing that his life, and the lives of every child in Blackwood, now depended on his ability to reveal the unspeakable truth. The weight of his discovery pressed down on Elias like a physical burden. He spent the remainder of the night poring over the ledger and blueprint, the cryptic notes filling him with a growing sense of dread. The enlightened sight wasn't a euphemism for blindness. It was a process of systematically dismantling one sense to heighten another, or perhaps to impose an entirely new, manipulated perception. The implications were horrifying. These weren't just victims. They were instruments in a perverse experiment. He knew he couldn't face Herr Schmidt and Frau Weber alone. He needed help, an ally. His mind immediately went to Maximilian. Despite Thomas's recent withdrawal, Maximilian had shown a glimmer of understanding, a shared unease. He was older, more experienced in the ways of Blackwood. The next morning, under the watchful eyes of Frau Weber during breakfast, Elias managed to subtly signal Maximilian. Maximilian, ever observant, caught his eye and gave a nearly imperceptible nod. Their shared plight, the silent fear that had bound them, now shifted into a fragile hope for alliance. Later, during the dreaded, silent study hour in the dusty school library, a room Elias now viewed with a new, chilling perspective, he found an opportunity. Herr Schmidt was occupied with a small group of older students, and Frau Weber was attending to a younger child who had fainted. Elias slipped a note onto Maximilian's desk, written on a torn piece of paper. It simply read, "Meet me tonight, after lights out. Old well in the courtyard. Urgent." Maximilian read the note, his eyes widening almost imperceptibly, then crumpled it in his hand, his gaze darting around the room before settling on Elias with a look of grim understanding. That night, the air was still and cold, the moon a sliver behind fast-moving clouds. Elias waited by the old, disused well in the center of the courtyard, his breath pluming in the frigid air. The wind, which had been so pervasive on his arrival, had died down, leaving an unsettling silence that magnified every distant creak and groan of the ancient building. After what felt like an eternity, a shadow detached itself from the dormitory entrance. It was Maximilian, moving with a cautious grace. He joined Elias by the well, his eyes reflecting the nervous apprehension. "What is it, Elias?" Maximilian whispered, his voice hushed. "You seemed different today." Elias pulled out the ledger and the rolled-up blueprint from beneath his coat. "Look at this, Maximilian. This is what they're doing to us. To Lena, to Hans, and Liesel." He quickly explained his nocturnal expedition, the blue light, the strange machines, and what he'd pieced together from the ledger entries. Maximilian's eyes grew wider with each revelation, his face paling in the faint moonlight. "They're not just blinding them," Elias explained, his voice low and urgent. "They're changing them, changing their minds, their perceptions, the enlightened sight. It's a lie. It's a twisted experiment." Maximilian took the ledger, his fingers tracing the clinical entries. Subject 12. Lena Schmidt. Optic nerve desensitization complete. Recalibration initiated. He looked up at Elias, his expression a mixture of horror and grim determination. "My God, Elias, this is monstrous." "We have to do something," Elias pressed. "We have to expose them. Tell someone." "But who?" "No one here will believe us," Maximilian said, shaking his head. "They're too afraid. Or they're complicit. The staff, the prefects. They're all part of this. And outside, who would believe two children from a troubled school? Herr Schmidt has too much influence in the village. He has a fearsome reputation." "Then we have to get this information out," Elias insisted, clutching the small vial of blue liquid he had also brought. This is proof. We need to get it to the authorities in Munich or to the local magistrate." Maximilian's gaze fell on the vial. "What is that?" "It's from the machines, the blue liquid. Whatever it is, it's what they're using." A chilling thought struck Maximilian. "Do you remember the stories, Elias? The old tales of Baron von Kessel, the school's founder? They said he was obsessed with finding a sixth sense, a way to perceive the unseen." Elias nodded, recalling the passage from the library book. He was researching dormant human faculties. "Yes," Maximilian whispered, "and they say his research was unconventional. He was a recluse, but known for his strange associates and his dark experiments. He died here, in this very school. Some say he never truly left." The connection solidified their resolve. The enlightened sight was Baron von Kessel's twisted legacy, continued by Herr Schmidt and Frau Weber. The mystery had deepened to reveal a long-held generational horror. "We need a plan," Maximilian declared, his voice firm, shedding his usual caution. "A way to get this evidence out of Blackwood without being caught." "The delivery wagon," Elias suggested, a sudden idea forming. "It comes once a week on Tuesdays, bringing supplies. We could hide the evidence there, address it to someone outside." Maximilian considered this. "It's risky, but it's our only chance. We'll need a reliable destination, someone who will listen." "My uncle," Elias said, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "He's a lawyer in Munich. He always believed me, even when my parents didn't. He'll know what to do." A fragile alliance had been forged in the cold, ominous shadows of Blackwood. Two frightened boys, united by a monstrous truth, were now plotting to expose a horror that had festered within the school's walls for decades. The suspense tightened around them, the weight of their secret pressing in. They were no longer just victims, they were conspirators, their lives hanging in the balance. If the unfolding secrets of Blackwood have captivated you, don't miss the next twists and turns. Subscribe to the channel to follow Elias and Maximilian's desperate struggle for truth. Remember, this is a fictional story. The following days were a torturous test of their resolve. Elias and Maximilian moved with a newfound, silent purpose. Their every action imbued with the urgency of their secret mission. The Tuesday delivery was only 2 days away, and they had to prepare meticulously. Their first challenge was to secure a suitable package for the evidence. They needed something small enough to hide in the wagon, yet sturdy enough to protect the delicate ledger, blueprint, and the vial. During a rare moment of unsupervised time in the school's neglected laundry room, they found an old, sturdy wooden cigar box, forgotten and covered in dust. It was perfect. Next, they needed an address. Elias meticulously wrote down his uncle's name and address in Munich on a scrap of paper using a stolen quill and ink from the teacher's desk during a moment of distraction. He folded it small and tucked it into the box with the evidence. The biggest hurdle, however, was getting the package onto the delivery wagon without being seen. The wagon arrived precisely at noon, driven by a grizzled, taciturn man who seemed to have an unspoken alliance with Herr Schmidt, exchanging quick, meaningful glances. The loading process was always supervised by either Herr Schmidt or Frau Weber. Elias and Maximilian observed the routine. The wagon would park in the narrow alley beside the kitchen entrance, where sacks of flour, barrels of water, and other provisions were unloaded. For a brief period, usually no more than 5 minutes, the wagon's back would be exposed while the driver negotiated with the staff inside the kitchen door. This was their window of opportunity. The weather seemed to mirror their internal turmoil. A relentless, cold rain began to fall, turning the courtyard into a muddy quagmire and shrouding Blackwood in a miserable grey. The constant drumming of rain on the roof added another layer to the oppressive atmosphere, making the school feel even more isolated. On the morning of the delivery, Elias felt a knot of dread in his stomach. He barely touched his breakfast. He caught Maximilian's eye across the dining hall. His friend looked equally pale. This was it. At precisely noon, the familiar creak of wagon wheels on gravel announced the delivery. Elias and Maximilian had positioned themselves strategically. Elias had feigned a cough during the morning lesson, complaining of a sore throat, which earned him a dismissal to the infirmary, a small, rarely used room near the kitchen. Maximilian, meanwhile, had volunteered for kitchen duty, a task usually reserved for older, stronger boys, claiming he wanted to earn extra privileges. Frau Weber, surprisingly, had allowed it, perhaps sensing a new obedience in him. Elias waited in the infirmary, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He could hear the sounds of the wagon being unloaded, the grunts of the driver, the muted voices of Herr Schmidt and Frau Weber as they supervised. He clutched the cigar box, which now felt impossibly heavy. The small vial inside clinked faintly against the ledger and blueprint. He heard Herr Schmidt's booming voice, "Faster, man, we haven't all day," followed by the driver's gruff reply. This was the moment. Elias slipped out of the infirmary door, moving silently. The alley was slick with rain, and the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and stale provisions. The back of the wagon was indeed open, a stack of empty crates waiting to be reloaded. Herr Schmidt and Frau Weber were just inside the kitchen doorway, their backs partially turned, engaged in a final conversation with the driver. Elias darted forward, his wet shoes squelching on the mud. He reached the wagon, his hands fumbling slightly in his haste. He quickly lifted one of the empty crates, slid the cigar box beneath it, and replaced the crate. He then quickly wiped away any muddy footprints he might have left on the wagon floor, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. Just as he finished, he heard a sharp, authoritative voice. "Elias, what are you doing out here?" He froze, his blood running cold. It was Frau Weber. She stood in the kitchen doorway, her pale eyes fixed on him, her expression a mixture of suspicion and cold anger. She had seen him. I was feeling dizzy, Frau Weber," Elias stammered, trying to sound genuinely ill. I thought I needed some fresh air." He coughed, a forced, unconvincing sound. Frau Weber took a slow, deliberate step towards him. The rain slicked her severe hair. "The infirmary is for rest, boy, not for wandering. Get back inside now." Her gaze swept over the wagon, then back to Elias, lingering on his mud-splattered shoes. And explain the mud on your boots. Elias's mind raced. He was caught, his heart hammered, and he could feel the cold sweat trickling down his back despite the chill. He thought of Lena, of Hans, of all the blank stares, and a desperate courage surged through him. He couldn't give up now. I slipped, he mumbled, pointing vaguely towards a puddle. The ground is so wet. Frau Weber narrowed her eyes, clearly not believing him. Just as she was about to press him further, a sudden loud clang erupted from inside the kitchen. "Headmaster, the stovepipe is loose," yelled a voice. Herr Schmidt cursed loudly. "Come, Frau Weber, priorities." Frau Weber hesitated for a moment, her gaze still fixed on Elias. Then, with a sharp sigh of exasperation, she turned and hurried back into the kitchen, drawn by the more immediate crisis. Elias didn't wait. He ran back into the infirmary, his lungs burning, relief washing over him in a dizzying wave. He had done it. The package was on the wagon. He pressed his face against the cold, grimy window, watching as the driver, oblivious, climbed back onto his seat. With a crack of his whip and a groan of the wheels, the wagon pulled away, disappearing into the persistent rain and fog, carrying with it the undeniable truth of Blackwood. He had risked everything, and for a moment he thought he had lost. But the evidence was gone, speeding away towards Munich. The suspense was still palpable, but now a flicker of hope had ignited within him. The dark secrets of Blackwood were finally on their way to being exposed. Days turned into a week, then two. The waiting was excruciating. Elias and Maximilian were on tenterhooks, every interaction with staff members scrutinized for any sign that their gamble had been discovered. Herr Schmidt and Frau Weber seemed more agitated than usual, their whispers more frequent, their gazes sharper, but nothing overtly pointed to the missing evidence. The constant hum of the school, however, seemed to grow stronger, vibrating with an almost malevolent intensity. Lena remained in her state of eerie stillness, though she was no longer in the subterranean chamber. She had been moved to a small, isolated room on the upper floor, where her condition was euphemistically referred to as nervous exhaustion. Elias caught a glimpse of her one day, as Frau Weber briefly opened her door. Lena's eyes were still blank, unfocused, but now she was also unnervingly still, like a porcelain doll. The recalibration was clearly taking its devastating toll. Then, one blustery afternoon, a sleek black carriage, unlike any ordinary delivery wagon, arrived at Blackwood's gate. Its arrival caused an immediate stir. Two impeccably dressed men, one with a severe aristocratic bearing, the other younger and carrying a satchel, stepped out. They were accompanied by several uniformed constables. Elias, watching from a classroom window, felt a surge of adrenaline. His uncle. It had to be. Herr Schmidt and Frau Weber emerged from the school, their expressions initially one of polite inquiry, quickly morphing into thinly veiled alarm as they recognized the visitors. The older gentleman, Elias's uncle, Josef Becker, a prominent lawyer from Munich, stepped forward. "Herr Schmidt, Frau Weber." Josef Becker's voice was clear and resonant, even through the closed window. "I believe we have some matters to discuss regarding the welfare of the children in your care, specifically young Elias Vogel." Elias gripped the window frame, his knuckles white. This was it. The next few hours were a whirlwind of hushed conversations, angry shouts from Herr Schmidt, and the quiet, firm pronouncements from Elias's uncle and the accompanying authorities. Elias and Maximilian, along with other children who had shown signs of the peculiar ailment, were taken aside and interviewed separately, their stories carefully recorded. Elias spoke with a conviction born of terror and truth, recounting his observations, his visit to the subterranean chamber, the machines, and the horrifying fate of Lena and the others. He described the hum, the blue light, the metallic scent. Maximilian corroborated his story, adding details of the children he had known who had succumbed to the blank stares. The vial of blue liquid sent with the evidence was crucial. Elias heard his uncle explain how it had been analyzed in Munich, revealing a complex chemical composition, including trace elements of rare minerals known for their light-refracting properties and, more disturbingly, a mild neurotoxin that affected the optic nerve. The blueprint, with its chilling diagrams of eye manipulation and sensory rerouting, sealed Blackwood's fate. As the day progressed, the dark truth of Blackwood was systematically unraveled. The constables, armed with a warrant, entered the school and began their thorough search. They found the hidden staircase, the subterranean chamber, and the remaining, eerily silent machines. The evidence was overwhelming. Herr Schmidt and Frau Weber, their faces contorted with rage and desperation, vehemently denied everything, claiming the children were unstable and prone to delusions. But their frantic protests were futile against the weight of the evidence and the testimony. In a dramatic turn, just as the constables were about to lead Herr Schmidt away, he confessed, his voice a guttural snarl of defiance. He ranted about Baron von Kessel's genius, about the true path to human enlightenment, and how the children were merely necessary sacrifices for a greater scientific understanding. He revealed that the enlightened sight was designed not to blind, but to sever the connection between the optic nerve and the brain's visual cortex, then reroute sensory input from other parts of the brain to perceive a new manipulated reality, a reality controlled by those who operated the machines. He believed this process would create a new generation of super-perceivers, pliable and controllable. It was a terrifying vision of human manipulation, a chilling echo of the obscure alchemical beliefs of the school's founder. Frau Weber, when confronted, remained cold and impassive, her pale eyes empty, mirroring the very emptiness she had helped inflict upon the children. She claimed she was merely following orders, a loyal servant to progress. As dusk settled, painting the sky in grim shades of grey and purple, Herr Schmidt and Frau Weber were led away in shackles. The once imposing silhouette of Blackwood now seemed diminished, its dark secrets laid bare. Elias watched them go, a profound sense of exhaustion washing over him. The hum of the school had finally ceased. The silence that replaced it was heavy, but it was the silence of a monstrous machine grinding to a halt, not the oppressive quiet of lurking fear. The children, including Lena, were gently removed from Blackwood. Lena, still unresponsive, was taken to a special facility for care, with the hope that her mind, though altered, might find some peace. Other children were reunited with their relieved yet horrified families. Elias's uncle embraced him tightly. "You were incredibly brave, Elias. You saved them all." Elias looked back at the now empty, dark windows of Blackwood. The storm had passed, leaving behind a profound sense of calm, but the memory of the chilling blue light, the blank stares, and the hum would forever be a part of him. The mystery had been solved, the darkness unveiled, but the echoes of Blackwood would linger. The aftermath of Blackwood's exposure sent shockwaves throughout Bavaria. The story of the boarding school of blindness, as the newspapers sensationalized it, horrified the public. Baron von Kessel's obscure and twisted research, once relegated to forgotten texts, was now brought into the harsh light of public scrutiny, revealing a horrifying legacy of human experimentation. Herr Schmidt and Frau Weber faced severe charges and were swiftly convicted. Herr Schmidt's fervent, almost delusional confessions about enlightened sight and super-perceivers were met with public outrage and scientific condemnation. The bizarre nature of their experiments, the systematic manipulation of children's senses, solidified their fate as depraved individuals who had abused their positions for a monstrous cause. For Elias, the immediate future was a whirlwind of medical examinations, interviews with authorities, and finally, the long-awaited reunion with his mother. Her relief was palpable, her embrace fierce and tearful. She apologized profusely for not listening to his initial fears, for placing him in such a place. The fear in her eyes was replaced with sorrow and profound gratitude. Elias was taken to live with his uncle, Joseph Becker, in Munich. The bustling city was a stark contrast to the oppressive quiet of Blackwood. His uncle's home was warm and filled with light, a sanctuary after the darkness he had endured. Joseph was a kind and patient man, understanding the deep trauma Elias had suffered. He encouraged Elias to talk, to process the horrors he had witnessed, and provided him with the stability and care he desperately needed. The other children of Blackwood also began their slow, arduous journeys to recovery. Lena's condition remained profoundly complex. While the physical impact of the optic nerve desensitization was irreversible, doctors hoped that over time, with specialized care, she might adapt to her altered perceptions. Her blank stare slowly softened, and while she remained mostly silent, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor in her hand, a slight turn of her head towards sounds, hinted at a new, different engagement with the world around her. She was not a super-perceiver, but a victim whose world had been irrevocably reshaped. Elias found solace in his new life, but the shadows of Blackwood lingered. He often woke in the night, startled by phantom whispers, the spectral hum, or the image of the pulsing blue light. He sometimes caught himself instinctively checking for the metallic scent in the air. These were not just memories. They were the scars of his ordeal, a constant reminder of the darkness he had faced. He maintained contact with Maximilian. Maximilian, too, had been deeply affected, but his quiet resilience had helped him through. He pursued a quieter life, working as an apprentice to a bookbinder, surrounded by the comforting scent of paper and leather, far from the cold stones and terrifying machinery of Blackwood. They exchanged letters, sharing their progress, their lingering fears, and their quiet hopes for the future. Their shared experience had forged an unbreakable bond, a testament to their courage in the face of unimaginable horror. Years passed. The Blackwood Boarding School itself became a notorious landmark, its gates chained shut, its windows boarded up, a desolate monument to a dark chapter in Bavarian history. Rumors persisted among the local villagers that the hum could still be heard on moonless nights, that the faint blue light sometimes flickered in the deserted subterranean chambers, a ghostly echo of the experiments that had taken place within its walls. But these were just whispers, the chilling folklore born from a real, unspeakable truth. Elias grew into a thoughtful, intelligent young man. He never forgot the children who had lost their sight or their peace at Blackwood. He carried the burden of his experience, but also the strength he had gained from overcoming it. He pursued studies in law, inspired by his uncle, dedicating his life to advocating for the vulnerable, ensuring that such atrocities could never be perpetrated again. He understood the insidious nature of power and the importance of vigilance. The mystery of Blackwood had been solved, its horrifying secrets laid bare for the world to see. There were no ghosts or magical powers, no impossible events, only the chilling reality of human ambition, scientific hubris, and the desperate struggle for survival against unimaginable odds. The story of Blackwood, where 16 children lost their sight in one night, became a cautionary tale, a stark reminder that the deepest horrors often lie not in the supernatural, but in the dark corners of the human mind. The resolution was complete, but the psychological scars, the lingering shadows, remained as a testament to the chilling truth that had unfolded within those ancient, unforgiving walls. And that concludes the boarding school where 16 children lost their sight in one night. If you were gripped by this tale of psychological terror, suspense, and mystery, and want more stories that delve into the authentic horrors of the human experience, subscribe to the channel. Remember, this has been a fictional story,